And I'm delighted to kick this conversation off with the author of another book, A State of Fear. It is Laura Dodsworth. Laura, good of you to join us, and a very good afternoon to you. My first question simply is whether, in your view, nudge works.
Yes, nudge absolutely works. And thank you very much for having me here today. There's much in your introduction that I agree with, some really important points. And I think that it's long overdue time that we had a public discussion, a public consultation on the government's reliance on nudge. I'd really like to ask you a question, actually, Alistair. You're an eminent broadcast news journalist. Now, would you collaborate with the UK government's behavioural scientists on ideas for new segments for your show with the specific goal of influencing viewers' attitudes and behaviour?
And I know what you're going to say next. Give me an example of someone that does.
Would you do it?
No, I wouldn't, because I think it's wrong. We're an independent journalistic organisation. We express our own views. We report what government says. We agree with it. We disagree with it. But we don't do what we're told to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So you know that I'll be dying to talk about the thesis of my book, A State of Fear. But before we get on to that, I think that the behavioural scientists are really quite emboldened by their success in the epidemic of using behavioural science techniques such as fear, shaming and norming in order to encourage people to comply with the lockdown rules. And the reason I think they're emboldened is there was a quite astonishing partnership announced between Sky, a licensed broadcaster, and the Behavioural Insights team. Now, Sky called the Behavioural Insights team independent. Now, they do have some journalists knocking around this, so they should know the Behavioural Insights team is in no way independent. It's part owned by the Cabinet Office. And this report talks about influencing news segments. Yes, news, but not just news, also drama, comedies, documentaries, children's programming, advertising, and using product placement too, in order to influence viewers' attitudes and behaviour subliminally without their awareness, in order to nudge people towards a government policy. And in this case, quite specifically, a controversial one, namely net zero. The report also talks about historic collaboration between the behavioural scientists and the media to create social change. Now, like you said in your introduction, some of this might be seen as quite harmless and innocuous. Whether it's appropriate for the media and the government to be working this way is another thing. But when it comes to really
Laura, let me come in at that point for two reasons. One is the argument is strongly made. Sky aren't here to rebut it, refute it or join the argument, and I'm certainly not going to take their part in it. But I hear what you say, the assertion being that it is wrong for a subsection of the Cabinet Office, the nudge unit, to cooperate with another broadcaster to promote COP26 ambitions and so on and so forth. I want to, if I may, drag you back to my main theme, and that is whether or not nudge is appropriate in matters of life and death. And there I think we are agreed. Coronavirus clearly is a matter of life and death. Is it appropriate to use nudge policy in that territory?
Yeah, I think there are a few issues with it. Like you said, there's some very clever and effective solutions that the nudge unit worked on in terms of hand washing. You know, that's the nudge unit. I think we could quite, without any controversy, call that a success. When it comes to using fear in order to encourage people to comply with the lockdown rules, there are a few problems. Firstly, like you say, a law should stand on its own. You know where you are with the law. You either follow it or you don't follow it. You can argue against it. The thing about nudge is it works at a subliminal level. And using fear, I think, was quite an egregious form of behavioural science. It's going to be hard, ultimately, in the inquiry to unpack the mental health impacts, self-harm, even suicide, people staying away from hospitals, and to unpack what came from a very natural fear of the pandemic, infection and death, and what came from a very sustained, coordinated and expensive government campaign to instill fear and democratise risk in people. So there's that impact on mental and physical health. There's also the fact that I think nudge is actually inherently anti-democratic, because what it does is strip your rational choice away from you. You are nudged subliminally into being a model citizen. First of all, you've had your rational choices taken away from you because you're not aware of the nudge. That's the whole point. It works at that subconscious level. But also, it means you've given up in determining what model citizen is. Yep. There's something that's quite infantilizing and paternalistic about it. Now, when I wrote my book, I made a very clear clarion call for a public consultation into the use of behavioural science by the government. And I'm not the first person to do this. Actually, going back to 2011, a select committee also noted that there are serious ethical issues and that we need a public consultation, and yet one hasn't happened. I'd say the reason that hasn't happened is that policymakers like nudges. As you said, the libertarians like them, but the left also like them. Everyone likes nudges because they avoid debates. They avoid all that nasty, awkward debate. They avoid regulation. Politicians just get on with nudging people towards what they want them to do without all that costly regulation and potential disagreement. And I think that's actually fundamentally anti-democratic.
Let me ask you one final one, a very, very clear analysis of your views across the range there. But as I said at the top as well, my timeline is full of people saying that they rather like it if it's nudge rather than law and edict, because fundamentally it still leaves them free to make their own choice, however dangerous or meretricious that decision may be. Do you accept that?
I think it depends what the nudge is being used for. Now, if
it's life and death. It's the coronavirus. I'm specifically talking about the life and death issues of...
Let's say with the vaccines, you can nudge people to get vaccinated. But ultimately, if what you're saying is everyone has to be vaccinated, it will be followed by a mandate. There is research to show that if people are aware that the nudge is merely one step on a coercive path, it turns them off. Nudge is about choice architecture. An example would be you put fruit at eye level, and that's a nudge, rather than taxing sugar. That's not how nudge is currently being used. It's being used more in a kind of a programme of sustained coercion towards an ultimate mandate. And I think that can turn people off, and I don't think it's an honest and a good use of nudging.
All right, Laura Dodsworth, greatly enjoyed our conversation. Thank you very much indeed for joining us